Hello everyone, hopefully you can hear me. We'll get started in a minute or two. We'll just make sure we've got everyone out of the waiting room bit and into the call. Right, I think we'll get going. People can join throughout. I'm conscious that we only have an hour. So yeah, hello and thank you for joining our first hiveCONNECT event. We hope to grow this over time to become a series of both online and in-person events aimed at helping building a knowledge sharing community and providing support to IT managers or those responsible for IT within their business. If there's any topics you'd like us to cover in future events, please do let us know. But for today, welcome to our first event, Passing Cyber Essentials with Confidence and Auditors Walkthrough. I'm Jade, and I'm delighted to introduce you to three of our cybersecurity experts who will be presenting today. First up, we have David, one of our technical consultants and Cyber Essentials advisor and assessor. We have Luke, another one of our technical consultants and Cyber Essentials advisor and assessor, and Drag, who is our account director and Cyber Essentials advisor. If you have any questions as we go along, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll go through them at the end. I just need to call out here that this session is being recorded and may be shared publicly in the future. So if you do use the chat or the Q&A, your name and your message may appear in the recording. If you'd prefer to remain anonymous, avoid posting personal details or identifiable comments. But without further ado, over to you, Luke, to get us started.
Thanks, Jade. Thanks everyone for joining. It's great to see a few people online and watching. So first of all, it makes sense to talk a little bit about what we're going to go through in today's webinar. So it's going to be what is Cyber Essentials, pretty basic thing we need to cover before we get into the nitty gritty. Some of the differences. There's Cyber Essentials, the Cyber Essentials Plus, which one you should go for, the controls, the assessment process, and some preparation tips as well. So yeah, let's jump straight into what is Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials is a government-backed cybersecurity certification and scheme here in the UK. So it's essentially designed to help protect organizations against common cyber attacks. The NCSC, so the National Cybersecurity Centre, recommends that Cyber Essentials is the minimum standard of cybersecurity for all organisations. It's not just aimed at SMEs, it's aimed at enterprises of all sizes, but it's quite a popular one for SMEs because it's quite an entry-level certification. In some cases, there is a little bit of cost involved to get you to that level where you need to be, but majority of what we're going to talk about, some of these technical controls in the webinar, should pretty much be a standard that your business should already be operating to. So the scheme was actually subsequently mandated for certain UK government contracts for those that involve sensitive and personal information. And we're also seeing a lot of public sector contracts also requiring Cyber Essentials before they potentially engage you as a supplier. So just a quick fact, in 2022, well, Cyber Essentials was issued to the 100,000 organization, and on average, we're seeing around about 30,000 organizations achieve Cyber Essentials a year, and that's increasing. I don't officially know the number at the moment for 2025, but I'm sure IASME, who govern the scheme, will shortly release those details. So it makes sense to explain a little bit about what Cyber Essentials protects from. essentially, Cyber Essentials protects businesses from attacks on internet-facing assets. So it's using techniques and tools that require relatively low technical expertise and are readily available. So these include things like social engineering attacks, password guessing, exploiting vulnerabilities. It's all very low-level threats, which often get overlooked and are quite commonly the routine for potential exploits. It's not physical security, it's not protecting you against denial of service. So if someone sends a high number of packets to your network, it may overload the network and take it down. It's not protecting you against that. There are other things you can do to implement that protection. It's not insider attacks. So if there's someone already inside the business that's planning an attack in, or attacks that require sort of interception techniques. So it's all common threats that we're seeing also regularly in the cyberspace at the moment. And to be honest, for me personally, social engineering is the biggest one at the moment. Some of the well-known cyber attacks that have gone on in the news recently have happened because of social engineering. So David's going to take us through a little bit about why Cyber Essentials matters for businesses now. So David, over to you.
I nearly did the classic forget to take myself off mute there. It was almost a throwback to COVID meeting times. So why does Cyber Essentials matter? Firstly, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to come along and watch this. Cyber Essentials matters, as Luke pertained to, that you can't turn on the news these days without seeing some form of cyber incident happening. The most recent being JLR and the impact it's had not just on JLR themselves, but their suppliers, their clients. We're seeing a massive uptake in, an uptick in cyber attacks. There were 204 nationally significant cyber attacks to August 2025, which is a 129% increase on the previous year. In the latest gov.uk survey results for cyber incidents, 43% of UK businesses and 30% of charities reported experiencing cyber breach or attack in the last 12 months. So Cyber Essentials, therefore, is a great way of kind of showing to your client base and subsequent, lots of business-to-business transactions you might do. It's a great way of demonstrating to them that you take Cyber Essentials seriously, cyber security seriously, and it just signals, to your existing clients, partners, and suppliers that you meet that qualifying criteria to get Cyber Essentials. It's a great differentiator as well. Obviously, you most likely have competitors in your field that offer similar services to yourselves. It's a great way of differentiating yourselves from them by holding out the fact that you can achieve Cyber Essentials. As Luke said, more and more businesses are going for this now, so it's becoming less of a differentiator, but there's still lots that won't or can't. So it's a great way to advertise to the world that you take it seriously to that minimum standard. I'm going to throw it over to Drag now about why organizations pursue Cyber Essentials certification. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Yes, so why do organizations get certified? So there could be a number of reasons why you would get certified. So one could be a mandatory reason where you have an existing client that you have to adhere to those specific standards. So that you might have an existing client that says you need to make sure you're compliant throughout the whole year. That's one example. So another one could be you are going for a tendering process, whether that's like a local government or MOD kind of contract. They will specifically say you need to have Cyber Essentials as a minimum kind of standard. Also, it shows commitment. As David touched upon, it shows to all your suppliers that you are committed to cyber security and you do take cyber security seriously. So that's another good reason why companies go for the Cyber Essentials. It also reduces the risk of breaches and cyber insurance premiums. So if you do have this in place, it does reduce the risk. I think according to ASME and NCSE, organizations with Cyber Essentials controls in place are 92% less likely to make a claim on their cyber insurance than those without. So quite an interesting fact there. So yeah, next slide. So let's talk about the scope. So you've got the network's devices data flow, and end user devices included, and not a role location based. So networks, so any internet enabled devices, for example, firewalls, routers, they fall part of scope. Wi-Fi, so if you have wireless access points that connect to a cloud controller, they are also in scope. So you also have devices. So any devices, again, if it's internet-enabled devices, so like laptops, desktops, mobile servers, anything that connects to corporate data is in scope. Even home devices. So if you've got someone working from home and they're using a personal device, if they are accessing business data, so corporate data, that does fall part of scope. And basically what you're trying to do, you're trying to protect the data wherever it lives. If it lives on their personal device, their server, or in the cloud, that again is part of scope. And the end user device, so this could be their mobile device in most examples. You have end users that connect to corporate emails, which is the most common reasons why they connect to it, just because it's easy for them. That device does become part of scope. So any bring your own device is part of scope. So next is not a role or location. So when we say not a role or location based, Cyber Essentials focuses on what's connected. It doesn't care who you are or your job title. It basically is your device touches any corporate data. If you're at home or in the office, it does form part of scope. Things that are out of scope. So people ask what can be out of scope. So factories are a good example. So you might have a bit of machinery that's a bit of old equipment, works fine, and it costs a lot of money to replace. So that's not feasible for the business. So they would have to put that in its own VLAN, so it's like a virtual private network, virtual network, virtual private network, or physical network. So when you do add this device into your own VLAN, a virtual private network, you're then making sure that that VLAN is configured to block all internet access. That's a must. So if you are going to put it in its own VLAN, make sure it's in its own VLAN and its internet traffic is blocked by default. And the other thing that's out of scope is Wi-Fi. So I briefly said Wi-Fi is in scope, and now I'm saying it's not in scope. So the reason why Wi-Fi access points could not be in scope is if you have a wireless solution in the building and it connects to a controller that's on premise physically in your building and it's not talking to the internet, then that does form out of scope. Okay, so that's quite a good one to know. I think that's it from me, and I'm going to now pass you over to David.
Perfect. So Cyber Essentials is made up of 5 key technical controls. The technical controls, you see them on the screen. So they cover off firewalls, secure configuration, user access control, malware protection, and security update management. You'll need to meet all of these technical controls in order to pass Cyber Essentials. I'm going to cover off firewalls briefly in my next piece. Now, the purpose of the technical controls when it comes to firewalls is to ensure that only secure and necessary network services are accessible from the internet. So the Cyber Essentials standard states that any device that has, any operating system on a device that has a built-in firewall must have that firewall enabled. And if there are kind of use cases where an operating system doesn't have a built-in firewall, such as there are certain flavors of Linux that doesn't include a built-in firewall, then a boundary firewall must be operational and enabled instead. Some of the key requirements also to meet the technical standard are remote management to the firewall. So let's say you want to access the administrative interface for a firewall over the internet. The most common use case for that is if you have a managed service provider or somebody who manages your IT, or if you have an internal IT who maybe looks after satellite offices or remote offices around the country, and they would have a requirement to access that firewall remotely over the internet. The standard dictates that you should have technical controls such as multi-factor authentication or IP address allow listing so that it can only be accessed from certain IP addresses. It's also important as well on firewalls when they're new. Obviously, you generally get a default password. It's important that we change any default passwords on firewalls so that they meet the Cyber Essentials password password requirements. And similarly, we must look to block any unauthenticated inbound connections to your network through your firewall. So a good example of that is maybe you've got internal CCTV, which you want to watch remotely. There would be some ports that would be required opening or some traffic rules to allow that traffic inbound so you could watch that those feeds remotely. It's important in those use cases that there are documented processes to approve those firewall rules being opened and allowed, and that where they're no longer required, they are reviewed and removed on a regular basis, I think is the wording by IASME. There's no kind of set timeline to that, but it's just a regular basis. Yeah, that just about covers off firewalls from my kind of perspective. I'm going to throw over to Luke, who'll take you through secure configuration. Luke.
I nearly did a you then, David. Nearly forgot to unmute myself. So blast in the past. The next sort of area we're going to talk a little about is secure configuration. So essentially, Cyber Essentials needs to make sure that computers and networks are configured correctly and securely. And the whole reason around this area is to essentially reduce vulnerabilities and make sure that those services are only fit to sort of fulfill their roles. They're not there to do anything additional. It's about keeping your devices and your infrastructure set up securely. So David, I think loosely touched a little bit on it. So there's maybe a little bit of overlap, but essentially we should be looking at changing default passwords. So it's quite common that you'll get a new device and the default passwords are set. Same with Windows machines. Quite often you might find an administrator account set up with no password. So often those accounts get missed and left behind. So there should be no default passwords on your network. I mean, how many times, and we'll all hold our hands up and be guilty of it, how many times have you put make a model into Google and looked for the default password and you've got in? It's quite scary, really. So yeah, changing default passwords is quite a big one. You should be looking to remove or disable unnecessary user accounts. So once again, you get a new machine, quite often you'll find there's a default administrator account. If you're not using it and you use a separate administrator account, which you should be using, then that default one should be disabled, as well as any other user accounts that are not used on that device. So for instance, a lever, it should be disabled quite quickly. One of the key ones as well, and I think trips up a lot of applicants, is unnecessary software on devices. So what we'll commonly see is people will purchase new laptops, new desktops, and as a standard, those devices have software or bloatware, as we like to call, installed on them. So we should be looking at removing those pieces of software. Quite often, and we'll go into this a little bit later on, when we are running vulnerability scans, it's often those softwares that are pre-installed on devices that get left behind and are not patched. So it's important that you remove software when it's not needed, and it will help you further on down the line when we talk a little bit about security updates. You should look to also disable auto run features. So that's quite a common one. Essentially, you shouldn't be able to plug in a USB stick, or if you download a file, it should not automatically run. That's a very big one. We need to make sure that devices have appropriate lock-in controls on them. And as part of that, it makes sure that when users are accessing corporate information, that they are authenticated before they're accessing that information. So you shouldn't be able to open up a device, go straight in and access company data without being challenged with an authentication prompt. So if a device requires a user's physical presence to access device services, such as a laptop or a mobile, then you should be looking at using credentials or biometric passwords. So your fingerprints or a PIN should be in place before you should access that service. It's quite a big one in terms of secure configuration. There are other areas to think about. We may overlap ever so slightly, but one thing that's also worth mentioning is local admin rights. That seems to trip up quite a few people in the assessment process. Users should be using a separate admin account for admin tasks, and their day-to-day usage should be within a standard user account. So that will help keep your devices secure. And I'm sure Drag's going to touch a little bit about it on the user access control next, so I won't go into it too much, Drag.
User access. Thank you, Luke. I'm glad you didn't go into it, Luke, because then there's nothing for me to then speak about. So user access control, so least privileges. So this one is quite a key one. When you do assign users access to the network, whether that's physical network internally or data in the cloud, whether it's SharePoint, do give them the least amount of privileges to do their job. They don't need to be part of 3 different kind of groups. If they just need to do one specific job, give them the least amount of privileges. You need to make sure that you remove or disable accounts, that could be for admin rights as well, that are no longer used. So do have periodic checks to make sure that is this user still here. So a good practice would be to have something like a joiners leaver procedure document. That is quite a tick box. Someone leaves, you just go for a set of tasks. Have we disabled their account? Have we changed their password? Are we going to redirect their emails? It could be a set of things. It's good practice to have something like that. And as Luke touched upon with the separate admin accounts, so this is another key thing is we've seen quite a lot where a day-to-day user logged into their machine and they can do administrative tasks as their normal login. Okay, that needs to change and it needs to happen so their normal day-to-day users are just normal accounts and they can't do any administrative work. So for example, if they're trying to make system changes, trying to install applications, remove applications, you should be prompted for a username and password, which would be an administrative username and password, to then do that said task. Okay. Now, you could use something like LAPS. So if anyone's heard of LAPS, if you just like Google LAPS, it's Local Administrative Password Solution. It's a very good tool. You basically install it. It installs individual local accounts on the individual machine. The good reason for that is you might have a user that occasionally wants to remove and install apps. So a dev, someone who works in development, they actively use it. Their normal end users will just be a normal user, but they occasionally, quite frequently, need to do system changes. So then you would give them the local account for that specific machine, which has administrative access. So you don't give them the domain access, you only give him local access, which he can do whatever he wants on that specific machine. The main reason for that is if that admin account got compromised and it's a local account, it's contained only on that specific machine. If it's a domain admin account, then obviously the whole domain credentials have been leaked. So do make sure you do have that in place. MFA, so that is a requirement. So it was a requirement a couple of years ago, but they have mandated that this is a requirement for anything enabled that can have MFA. You need to have multi-factor authentication wherever possible. So that could be anything like cloud apps. So if you've got 365, Xero, software as a service, anything that has the capability of having MFA, you need to make sure that you have that enabled. It does protect against brute force. But if you don't have MFA, then you need to implement some policies like set up throttling or lockout policies. It's very important that you do have this in place. MFA, honestly, it's the most simplest way to have security added as an extra layer. So if your account was compromised and the password was stolen, the next safety net is your MFA. And the phishing is the most common way. They phish, they enter their password in, they think they're going into a specific website, and now they've got your credentials. MFA blocks that, okay? So a very good thing to have that in place, and it's needed as well. So next thing is strong and unique passwords. So we do encourage people to have 12 characters long. You can have 8 characters, but you make sure you have systems in place that does block common passwords internally. But I would probably advise having something like 3 random passwords, maybe some some numbers and some symbols. It doesn't have to be complex, capital letters. It's just 3 random words is fine with some numbers. That's the main key point. It's good practice to probably not use the same password on other apps that you use. You could use something like a password manager. I know it's quite hard to keep on top of all these passwords. You've got different websites. Try and use single sign-on if possible, but password manager is another good way you could probably use. You could also look at going towards more of a passwordless kind of route authentication. So you could use like pass keys, biometrics, physical tokens, something along those lines. That will be quite helpful as well. So that's it from me, and I'm going to pass you over to David on anti-malware.
So thanks, Greg. Anti-malware is a fairly light section in the sense that it's critically important to your environment, but most SMEs should already have this in place. And an anti-malware solution is generally included in an antivirus product. So, for example, it's built into Defender on Microsoft, and most antivirus protection solutions, Bitdefender, things like that, will include an anti-malware aspect to it. The purpose of the anti-malware technical control within the Cyber Essentials framework is to restrict execution of known malware and any untrusted software. The requirements state that you should be using anti-malware software where it's available, and that it's configured to the manufacturer's recommended installation instructions. That includes things like definition updates. So by default out of the box, most of these applications will be pre-configured with the correct settings. But if the manufacturers roll out for definition updates are, every 4 hours, it must be configured to do that. You couldn't go in and then change that to 2 days because that's how you felt it needed to be done. It has to be in line with their recommendations. It must be configured to prevent malware from running and executing malicious code. So again, the only use case where you might want to kind of bypass that is, again, if a dev's making some custom bit of software that's likely to trigger a false positive, you might want to disable that. Most use cases day to day, that's going to be enabled by default, but again, it needs to be enabled to be compliant with Cyber Essentials. It must be configured to prevent connections to malicious websites. Again, where you get the definition updates, it will publish a list of known sites with malware affected sites. So, but again, it should be configured to prevent that. It's also important that you're only using approved and code signed applications. So what this means is in the case of a mobile phone, for example, if you have an Android device, you can't just go off and download a random APK file that you've snapped from a website and install it. It has to be from an authorized store. So things like the Google Play Store for applications on an Android phone, the App Store on iOS. I know iOS is a bit more locked down than Android anyway. Things like the Windows Store or a trusted vendor's website where the application has been signed that it's safe and it's a trusted application. Again, that's a requirement under Cyber Essentials. It's worth noting as a side that there are no recognized or compliant anti-malware solutions in place for mobile devices. So I know there are a few vendors who promise kind of antivirus, anti-malware solutions for mobile phones, but there's no recognized or requirement for Cyber Essentials for mobile phones to have any kind of anti-malware solutions. That's kind of just a side note. And this would apply to all your desktops, laptops, servers. So that basically covers off anti-malware. Like I say, it's a fairly short and light slide. So I'm going to throw it over to Luke because the next one's quite meaty.
Thank you, David. The final area of technical control that Cyber Essentials requires you to have in place is regarding your security update management. It's one of the more tricky ones, and it's one where most businesses seem to sort of slip up. So essentially, we just need to make sure that devices and software are not vulnerable to known security issues. So essentially, one of the best and easiest ways to achieve this is just to, first of all, make sure that all your software is licensed and supported. So removing any unlicensed software, what we tend to find is businesses will use a software for a period of time, they'll then change or they'll decommission that piece of software, but they'll leave it behind on devices. And as a result of that, those devices are then not updated and do not receive those security updates for that application. So when you're done with an application, make sure it's removed across your estate. If you are using applications, then make sure that it's supported and you're receiving, that way you'll receive security updates. Automatic updates are they're your friend, I would say. Applying automatic updates where possible will help you achieve cyber essentials. So vendors quite often have solutions within their applications to automatically patch and install those updates. Quite common ones are Google Chrome, your Firefox, your web browsers. Those will automatically install your updates for you and keep you patched and up to date. So Cyber Essentials essentially says you should have automatic updates enabled where possible. When a vulnerability is known or there's a security update released, we should be looking to update within 14 days of release. So Cyber Essentials mandates that all updates that are either critical or high risk vulnerabilities or the CVSS version 3 score of 7 or plus should be patched within 14 days of release. So it gives you enough opportunity to push that patch out and make sure it doesn't cause any impacts on your day-to-day production and your operation of services across the test base. And then providing all is well, you can then roll it out across the rest of your devices. I think it's not as common anymore for these updates to cause issues that they used to do, maybe sort of 5 or 6 years ago. But it's worth rolling out to a test base, especially if that is a mission critical piece of software that you're using for day-to-day within your business. Where it's not possible to automatically patch, you should look to install those patches manually. And quite a major product that we see that is the case for is Sage. You have to install those updates manually. Yeah, it's important to make sure that you patch within the 14 days, or if possible, patch as soon as possible. So it's considered a reasonable amount of time, 14 days, to make sure you've got your updates installed. And you should also be making sure you use vendor-approved mechanisms for vulnerability fixes. So using their patches, installing their fixes, making configuration changes that they recommend to improve security. So it's a continuous review to make sure that your software is aligned to what the manufacturer recommends. And as a result of that, it's secure and it's kept up to date. So those are the main sort of 5 areas that we've gone through on the webinar today. There are a few other areas which I'm going to loosely touch on, but we don't necessarily have enough time in today's webinar to go through in detail. But it's worth noting these. So I'm just going to sort of skim over them very quickly before we go into a little bit more about Cyber Essentials, specifically the differences. There's 2 different types. There's Cyber Essentials and there's Cyber Essentials Plus. Differences between those 2, which I know Drag's going to go into in a little bit. But a few sort of considerations is that bring your own devices and mobiles are in scope if they have company data on them. So mobile phones, we sort of touched on a little bit earlier on in the webinar. Commonly, it's emails. That does bring your personal mobile phone into scope. So we do need to make sure that it's up to date and it's not jailbroken, for instance. So home working and remote working, where you're not protected behind a company firewall on premise in an office, you should look to have a software firewall enabled. That will then be your boundary and protect your device. If a company router is provided, I mean, it's not so common anymore, but if your business provides you with a home router for a 4G connection, for instance, because that's a company-owned asset and it's been provided to you to work, that does fall into scope, so it would need to be patched and maintained. But generally, if you're working from home, you're working remotely, then your software boundary, your software firewall is the boundary there. Drag loosely mentioned about wireless devices in terms of if they're managed externally via the cloud and access the internet that way, they fall into scope. If they're managed internally and don't have access to the internet that way, then they're outside of scope. There's cloud services. So I'm sure many of you and your managed service providers are pushing you to move away from on-premise infrastructure. So these are like software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. So essentially where you're not managing and you don't own that infrastructure yourself, there's different responsibilities where, for those 3 areas that you need to make sure are in place. So If it's software as a service, then quite commonly the responsibility will lie with the provider that you've purchased that service from. But you should be working with that provider to make sure that they have got the relevant controls in place for Cyber Essentials. Quite commonly, they do. Accounts used by third parties are in scope as well. So a prime example is if you work with a managed service provider, they should be using unique accounts to manage your network. So there shouldn't be the MSP name admin account, which is shared between all the engineers within that managed service provider. They should be signing in with unique individual accounts. And that's also one of the main things that Cyber Essentials makes a requirement, that every user logs in with a unique and individual account. And finally, web apps. So commercially developed web apps are in scope. So if you purchase a web app and you host it yourself, it's within scope. Custom web apps, so one that you develop yourself in-house, are not in scope. So these are bespoke web apps unique to your business. Cyber Essentials is not too concerned about those web apps. But if you purchase a web app from a provider and they've got the Cyber Essentials logo on their website and that's, they're Cyber Essentials certified, just because they've got the certification doesn't mean that their web app meets the standards of Cyber Essentials. So in their instance, they've achieved Cyber Essentials, but because it's their own app that they've developed, it's their custom app, they've built it themselves, it doesn't fall part of Cyber Essentials. But you as an applicant, because you're using their web app, it does fall into scope of Cyber Essentials. So one thing we commonly see is people would get tripped up on thinking that because they've purchased a web app from a Cyber Essentials approved organization, that web application is in line with the standard. For them, it's not. For you, it is. So yeah, there's a bit more to go into, and if you do have any questions regarding those other considerations, then I'm sure we'll potentially do a webinar another extra date or release some material. Feel free to pop any questions in the chat. So Drag's going to talk a little bit about now the differences between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. So Drag, over to you.
Thank you, Luke. Yes, this is quite a short one as well. So we do get asked what the difference is between the Cyber Essentials and the Cyber Essentials Plus. There's a misconception that the standard and the technical controls are slightly different, because the Essentials Plus is obviously you have the plus, so it must mean more, which it does mean more, but in a different way. So as it says there, Cyber Essentials certification is a certified, you're self-certifying yourself. So you go for Cyber Essentials, you get a questionnaire and you answer the questions. You say, I do this, MFA is enabled. We uninstall software that are no longer needed. We change passwords, all these kind of things. You answer the questionnaire. You're self-certifying yourself. You then give these questions over to an auditor. They check it and say, yes, you've answered questions correctly. Well done. Here's a pass, if provided you've answered everything correctly. Now, the Cyber Essentials Plus is addition to the Cyber Essentials. So you still need to have the questionnaire, but it includes an independent technical verification through an external auditor. So you have someone come to your site and they would audit your questionnaire. So they'll go through your questionnaire and say, okay, you say you cannot install apps as a normal user. Let's see. And they'll pick 5 or 10 users, depending on the scope, how many users you have. It'd be a certain percentage. They are just trying to prove that you do have certain controls in place. Okay, that is the main key difference between the two. But the actual standard itself is identical. Plus is just you've been verified externally by a different governing body to say, yes, you do adhere to these standards, and we've double checked everything. So that's the main two key differences between the two. And I'll pass you over to Luke. How does the assessment work? So over to you, Luke.
So I think Drag sort of loosely touched on this, but I'll just sort of briefly overview it as well. So essentially, Cyber Essentials is a prescriptive scheme. So either controls are applied or they're not. The assessment issues a fail or pass based on the information provided within CE. And within CE Plus, this as part of that sampled user base, an assessment takes place to make sure that those controls are in place. So if you contrast it into something like ISO, for instance, organizations in that instance assess risks for themselves and decide the actions that they take. Cyber Essentials is an all or nothing scheme. So for each control, you need to make sure that you have those controls in place. It's not risk-based. You either have the controls in place or you don't. If you don't have them in place, then you don't meet the criteria, and you cannot pass Cyber Essentials. If you do, then great, you pass. So, as Drag sort of mentioned, you'll have Cyber Essentials. You'll have a questionnaire. You'll go through and answer the questions, and it's then independently assessed. And then you either get issued a pass or a fail. There are in some cases where you can be asked some more information. You may have answered a question where you haven't included enough information, or maybe you sort of contradict yourself ever so slightly. It does happen. We can ask for more information as part of that assessment process. So just because you've entered something and you maybe weren't 100% sure how to word it, the assessor can come back to you and say, okay, I get what you're trying to say here, but can you just clarify this for me? With Cyber Essentials Plus, we will go through, like Drag mentioned, that questionnaire and independently check a sampled number of machines, depending on what you've outlined in your scope. It roughly takes around 15 minutes per device. The process involves the assessor going on the machine. You can do it via a Teams call or a remote session, and essentially take screenshots, and we just prove the operating system version, making sure that malware cannot run on machines. We go through those checks, we take those screenshots, and then we also work with the end user to evidence that their cloud services have multi-factor authentication on as well. And if they have a mobile phone, we'll also ask for screenshots of the version to also make sure that it's not jailbroken. Check things like all your apps are up to date as well. Now, one big area is scanning machines for vulnerabilities. So as part of that sample users on their laptops or desktops, we will run, or an assessor will run a vulnerability scan against those machines. So we're looking to see and make sure that critical high-end vulnerabilities do not exist on those machines. Now, trust me, we run the scans and there's always one or two things that get picked up. If we did a scan that was squeaky clean first time, then yeah, I think those are very few and far between. So as part of the Cyber Essentials Plus, if we find critical or high vulnerabilities, you are given the opportunity to remediate those vulnerabilities. So just because of higher critical vulnerability has been identified doesn't mean you fail the assessment. You've just got to make sure that you can resolve that vulnerability within 2 working days, and then we will rescan and then make sure that it's clear. So that's the assessment process. David's going to touch a little bit more regarding the pass and the fail criteria now for the assessment.
Thanks, Luke. So you've taken the decision to get Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus. You've gone through the audit and you've received the pass. That's great news for the business. Effectively, you'll get a copy of your certificate given to you in a web app called Blockmark, which is a website where you can go and you can publicly verify businesses and the certificates they hold. You'll also be given a bunch of marketing material, which you can then put on your LinkedIn, your website, and your social medias, so you can show to your clients. The Cyber Essentials is valid for 12 months from the date that the award is passed. And then if you do decide, for example, to go for Cyber Essentials Plus, you've got 90 days from the date of achieving Cyber Essentials to then pass Cyber Essentials Plus. Obviously, we've talked about the benefits, but obviously you passed. It means that you can demonstrate to your clients, vendors, suppliers that you're taking cybersecurity seriously. It reduces your overall cyber risk. It means you're less likely to become one of the statistics of people who do get attacked. It does mean with certain insurance providers that you will have lower premiums for cyber insurance. And another benefit of a pass is you do get a level of free cyber insurance included as long as you're a UK domiciled company, and I think your turnover is less than 20 million a year. Again, another nice little benefit to have. If you fail, Luke's kind of covered off some of these bits, but you will get feedback as to why you failed, and any kind of remediation, you'll be given the opportunity to remediate any of the reasons you failed. You can then resubmit. As may say, you can do that twice. before effectively the application is closed and you will have to go through the process all over again. But you will always be, like Luke said, it's not necessarily a hard fail. Sometimes they will come back and ask for more information, because a lot of what you can sometimes see is someone will answer the question, but they haven't given enough detail, to fully qualify the answer. So yeah, you will sometimes get pushback there. I'm not going to say too much more because it's going to cover off what Drag's going to talk about next, which is the common reasons for failure. So I'm going to throw over to Drag for the next bit.
Thank you, David. So the common failures. So these are the common failures that we see. So unsupported operating systems. So it could be, for instance, Windows 7 no longer used. That is an automatic fail. It could also be Windows 11. So you have a Windows 11 machine and you think, great, it's supported, so I'm all good. But if it doesn't have a specific feature pack that is supported, then it's a fail. So for example, if you've got a Windows 11 machine that's on 21H2 feature update or 22H2, that is an automatic fail. If you had 23H2, I think that's still okay up until next month, I believe. You still have to move on to the next one. So please make sure that you do have the software up to date, not just the version, but the actual feature pack. So Windows 11, 24H2, or the recent one that's just been released, which is 25H2. Just make sure you're on the latest kind of patch. As David and Luke touched upon, so missing scope details. So this is another failure where we would probably ask for more information. So if you did list, we have Windows 11 machines, and you didn't put too much details like the specific feature pack, then that would be, well, you haven't got this right. Please provide more information. As soon as you provide more information and it is end of life, i.e. Windows 11 and it's a 21H2, for example, then that would be a fail to say, sorry, you need to update to a newer feature pack, and then you'll pass. Another one is MFA. As I touched upon earlier, MFA is a requirement. If your cloud apps has the ability to have MFA, you have to have MFA enabled. It's a non-negotiable. As may say, it's now a necessity. You have to have it enabled. If it does support it, it needs to be enabled. And then finally, you've got outdated software. So I think Luke touched upon it briefly, actually, with software patches. You've got a patch within 14 days. So the things that you cannot patch, which you touched upon, was Sage. So Sage is more of a manual process where you use Sage Accounts 50, for example. If you do have Sage Account 50, you have to periodically check, is there an update out there? Yes, there is. Okay, let's go and update it. And I know it's a pain, because if you've got, say, 5, 10 people you need to update, it's a pain. But you do make sure that software is up to date. So if you've got Office 2013, for example, or 2007, for example, it's not supported, then make sure you've removed it and you've updated the latest version. Same as what I said about Sage, make sure that you do have that updated. I think that's for me, and I think we're going to be asking for Q&A soon. So if you do have any Q&As, Jade will also be touched upon that in a minute, but do put them through, and I'll put you through to Jade now.
Hello again. Thank you, Dave, Luke, and Drag. That was really, really insightful. I can't see any questions in the Q&A at the moment, but I was sent one beforehand. And that was kind of, how do I get started with Cyber Essentials? If I want to get certified, how do I prepare? Who do I reach out to? And kind of how long might that process generally take? I don't know which one of you wants to take that one.
Luke, do you want to take that one? Your cyber advisor / assessor?
Thanks, Drag. Set me right out there. So essentially, if you want to look to start achieving Cyber Essentials, the first point of contact, if you're fortunate enough to work with a managed service provider, is to reach out to them in the first instance. So a lot of managed service providers, I mean, obviously I'm biased to say BZB, we align to Cyber Essentials, but if you're working with another managed service provider, the first step is reaching out to them. If they offer it, then great. If they don't, then maybe sort of have a little search around. It's always worth reviewing. But essentially working with your provider, you need to look at the technical controls that Cyber Essentials mandates. So as part of the NCSC's website, and it's on IASME's as well, there's a Cyber Essentials technical requirements document. So you can download that document. It's about 15-20 pages. If you're feeling quite technical, maybe put it through Copilot and ask it to summarize it for you. It's quite a bit to read. But essentially in there, it will outline what you need to do to meet the standard. So no two businesses are the same. Some may be further ahead than others. So you should look at what that the technical requirements is asking of you and ask yourself, do I do this? Do I do that? If I don't, then how can I look to achieve that? Drag loosely touched on local admin rights on people's machines. You know, lapse would be a solution for any IT managers that are in the call. But working with your technical provider should be able to offer the correct solutions that you need to achieve the standard. Vice versa, if there's any IT managers in the call, then having a look over that technical requirements document and looking at how you can achieve those standards through group policy, if you're still on premises, in-tune configurations, if you're fully utilizing the cloud. So that document is sort of like the go-to for everything you need for Cyber Essentials. In terms of a timeline to achieve the standard, no two businesses are the same. Some may be further ahead than others. Most of the time, if you're working with a provider, they should already have majority of these controls in place. If they don't, then I mean, it sort of is a very good question to ask. Why? Because it's considered the minimum standard for cybersecurity. So if you're not near enough there, then it does ring alarm bells, to be honest. So yeah, implementing the controls can take a few months if you're quite far behind, or it may take a few weeks depending on what you're sort of missing. But referring back to that Cyber Essentials controls document is a really good place to start. Have I missed one other point, Jade? I know you sort of chucked a few at me there.
I think that covered everything. It was just kind of, yeah, how do you get the ball rolling and how long can you expect it to take? So I think that covered that really, really nicely. So that brings us to the end of the webinar for today. On behalf of the whole team, thank you so much for joining us for our first ever hiveCONNECT event. We hope you found it useful, and we also hope to see you at future events that we put on. We've added some documents and tools onto the screen that you might find beneficial if you want to find out more. So do take a look if you're interested. I appreciate we couldn't cover absolutely everything in detail within the hour. So we're of course happy to pick up any questions or discussion points going forward. Our contact details are on the screen. So yeah, please do get in touch if you ever want to discuss anything Cyber Essentials related or anything regarding IT support in general. So thanks again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.